Welcome to Right on Track, a songwriting podcast. Thanks to Tom for tuning in. I'm Demi Michelle Schwartz, and I'm thrilled you're joining me on my songwriting journey. So kick back and relax, don't fall flat, and remember, stay right on track. Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of Right on Track. I am so excited because joining me today is Tom Kwiat from Live and Amplified. Hey Tom.
Hey, how's it going, Demi?
Going great. How's it going for you?
Oh, it's going well. It's hot, very hot here in Texas, but other than that, everything's good.
Yeah, it's been crazy hot here in Pittsburgh too. I'm kind of looking forward to fall. I feel like when I was growing up, summer was my favorite season, but now I just really love fall. So I'm looking forward to Halloween and pumpkin spice everything, the fall
I feel
vibes.
that. Yeah, I'm looking forward to the cool off a bit. We've been in the triple digits pretty much every day since June 1st.
Oh wow. That's
So, yeah,
nuts. Yeah, I
yeah.
went to Arizona for a Shawn Mendes concert in 2019 and I went in July. And I've never been to Arizona before. I've only been to California out west, but it was like 110 degrees every day. And I was like, my northeastern body cannot handle this.
I have completely understood. It gets hot out there.
Well, I'm so excited you're joining me today to chat all about your show and just about hosting a music show in general. But before we get into that, can you share with the listeners a little about yourself and what made you start Live and Amplified?
Ooh, well, that's a very long answer, but I'll try and condense it down as much as possible. So my name's Tom Kwiat. I'm originally from Chicago or the South Side of Chicago. Um, and I went through the school process and fell in love with filmmaking, and through the journey of going to film school and whatnot, I really fell in love with the idea of documentaries and telling other people's stories, like real life stories and whatnot. And so that's kind of where the genesis of Live and Amplified came in. When I was in school, we had this like basement, or so it was a group of six of us. We rented a duplex, and we had this basement that everybody would just kind of put random stuff in, and it unintentionally became like a music room because we had one guy that was in the marching band, and he wanted to learn how to play traditional drums. He played mainly the snare drum, and he wanted to learn how to play like the drums outside, and so he bought a drum kit. And then we had one guy that had an acoustic guitar, and that so this kind of became a makeshift music room. And I had this idea for a film telling the story about this band that doesn't really exist, so it was an interesting idea. And so I never ended up making that film, but fast forward, I think about 4 years, I found myself in a recording studio with a few friends of mine. I moved from Southern Illinois out to Roswell, New Mexico, in the intermediate, and I found myself in this recording studio, and they were telling me all these bizarre road trip stories about things that had happened to them out on the road, because they were like regional touring acts. They'd tour around the Southwest or whatever. And I was like, and I thought about that idea of telling the story of a band that doesn't really exist that I had in college. I was like, well, wait, what if we do something where we actually tell real stories? And so we came up with this idea of doing it wasn't a podcast originally, it was a video series, and then the video series kind of morphed into the podcast.
That is such an awesome story. I think the coolest thing is that this is something that kind of developed over a period of time
Mhm.
and that the focus was always on some form of storytelling, either being the initial idea with the imaginary band, but ending up
Yeah.
being real bands. And I think it's so cool because I think, especially with the music industry, One of my favorite things with hosting this show too is getting to talk to people, hear their stories, the inspiration behind their songs, because I feel like everybody has a story to tell, and especially in the music industry, that's definitely very, very valid.
Yeah, for sure. And it was one of those things where I had seen similar ideas kind of come and go. There was a point there for about a year I lived in Kentucky, and there was a group of filmmakers that started doing acoustic jam sessions with bands. They'd come in and then they just play their music, and that was kind of it. But it didn't last more than 3 months because you had like five stubborn artistic filmmakers that had their own vision for where this thing was going to go, and then it just kind of ended. And I basic idea always kind of stuck in my head on top of everything else. And so then once I found myself in New Mexico, I was friends with an audio engineer, and I was like, hey man, I've had this idea, what do you think about it? And we just kind of it was I think it was November of 2015, we sat down and, we really started making some headway on it.
That's awesome, and I think you bringing up how this other series that you knew of didn't last very long, that's a great transition into the fact that you've been doing this for 6 years, and that's definitely very sustainable what you're doing. You obviously have such a passion for it. So, for doing it for 6 years, what do you think is so special about Live and Amplified that makes it last and continue to grow?
Well, first off, so we've been doing the podcast for 6 years. Like Live and Amplified itself, it's been about six and a half. But you know, I think just the fact that we work with our intentions from the get-go was to work with independent musicians. We didn't really have any aspirations of, oh, one day we're going to be sitting here with Ed Sheeran having this conversation. It was never really that aspiration. It was always, I want to I want to interview Ed Sheeran before he's Ed Sheeran. You get what I'm talking
For
about?
sure, yeah.
And so that was kind of always the idea, and the fact that we give these musicians we've had musicians come on, not necessarily the podcast, but like back when we were doing our video series, which we just recently relaunched, by the way. Back when we were doing our video series, we would have people on that had no recorded music, or like they were just doing open mics, and we thought they had talent. So it was like we gave musicians a chance. Like it didn't matter if they had five fans or five social media or Facebook likes, or if they had 5,000, it didn't matter. So I think that's really ultimately what the sustainability has been.
That's awesome, and I think that's a great approach because there are so many other platforms that are very specific with focusing on your numbers and how many people were like in your biggest audience you played for. And I think like I've been in situations myself trying to either get on podcasts or blogs that wanted those kind of statistics, and it's like, are you going to actually listen to my music, or is my talent based on where I'm at currently? Because everybody's path is different. Some get really lucky and blow up right away. Others need to work for 10, 20 years before they get a big break. And so I feel like the industry in general has shifted so much toward numbers on Spotify and Instagram and stuff. And I love how even after 6.5 years, your focus is still on the music and giving independent artists a
Yeah,
chance.
yeah, and it's been kind of because we kind of reverted. Like during the pandemic, I kind of gave away some control over like who we were bringing on, because it was one of those deals where it's like, you know what? During the pandemic, my schedule was so all over the place that I didn't have time to schedule my own interviews, so I just kinda made it a thing where it's like, "Hey, you schedule like, here's what I have available. Here are the time slots I have available. You book if whatever works for you, that's fine." And there wasn't really a vetting process, and, it worked for the most part because we got to meet a lot of really cool musicians. We got to meet a lot of interesting people with, fun stories and whatnot, but it also backfired a bit because we had some real crazy people that came, like some real, like some of the stories that I have, like yeah. But then we also had some musicians that weren't there for the right reasons.
Yeah.
Like it was one of those deals where they were either really young in their career and they were just trying to get an immediate spike on a release. And it's like, we're not necessarily going to bring you that immediate spike. We're going to bring you the prolonged, like it's going to take some time to get you there, but we're going to give you the exposure and it'll get you there. But it's not going to be, oh, we were on the Live and Amplified livecast on August 1st and August 3rd. We had 100,000 listens on Spotify, because that's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
But it's just, so we've had people kind of come in for the wrong reasons, but now, ever pretty much since we started streaming on Twitch, I kind of took back control of everything, and it was like, okay, now I'm doing more research into who the musician is. I'm like deeply listening to their music, and if it works with me and it connects with me, you know, it I'll definitely have them on. So it's one of those deals where it's like, now, like over the last 90 days or so, we've had some of our best interviews that we've ever had, because, it's these are musicians that you know, not that I wouldn't have had a good interview with them regardless, but it was, oh, I physically put them there. I picked them to go on this time slot.
Yeah. No, that's a really great point. I mean, like, you're still giving many musicians a platform, but I still think, like, being mindful and doing research is so important, especially because yours is live. Like,
Yeah.
this is pre-recorded, so if something hits the fan, I can edit. But when you're doing live stuff, you're really putting the trust in the person. Like, oh my God, don't say anything bad. Don't make me look bad or whatever. And so that's completely valid. Like, I definitely do research into people who I have on, and this show has gotten more popularity where I've had to be more selective because I only do 6 episodes a month, and so I have to start digging deeper. But just like regardless, like I would feel extra stressed if it was live because you have no control really over what someone
Mm,
might say.
yeah. And I think the tipping point for that, even though I didn't act on it right away, it was right around the election time in
Mm.
2020. We had a guy that just came on and he was out there. He sat on my podcast and asked me if I had a demon living behind me, because I had a dehumidifier that was, so I had this dehumidifier that was off, and it has like two red lights to let me know that it's off. And he's like, "Is that a demon behind you?" And I'm like, "Wait, what?" And I looked behind me. I was like, "No, that's my dehumidifier." He's like, "Okay, I was concerned because I thought you had a demon living behind you." And I'm like, "Oh boy. All right." And at this point, we're already live in the podcast. And then he starts going off about how he saw, not to get political, but he went on a whole political tirade. And then how he watched his son die and his soul leave his body.
Oh my God.
And I'm just sitting here like, it's still up on our Facebook somewhere, but I never ended up releasing that episode because we didn't, like, it was a 45-minute conversation. I think we talked about 10 minutes about music.
Oh my gosh, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Oh my
Yeah.
God. Yeah, I don't, oh my gosh. And the other thing too with doing it live, like if there's any kind of technical glitch or anything, like you don't have control over that either. But I mean, shout out to you for taking all the risks.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, like, I mean, the technical, usually, as the only, like, big issue, especially during the pandemic, because internet was in high demand during the
Yeah.
pandemic. But, like, that was the only real issue we ever had, was somebody's internet going out, or, whatever it was. That was the only real technical issue that we had to worry about.
Yeah, no, I think it's really fun. I've done quite a few live interviews, The one I did with you, I think was like the most fun. It was so late. I remember tweeting like, "Oh my gosh, I have an interview at like 9 o'clock or something, or 10 my time. I
Yeah,
can't remember."
yeah,
But I feel like I was at the point where like I get really stressed when I do live stuff for the reason that it can be edited. But I think
yeah.
that late, I was like in the state between being tired and like being kind of nervous. So I was just like super chill and I was in this
Yeah.
mid space and it was really fun. And I think live interviews are just really fun in general too, because it captures straight up humanity, like any glitches, any, funny slip ups, bloopers kind of things like that stays in there and it really
Mhm.
captures like realism.
Yeah, for sure. And that's kind of the whole point is it's one of those things where I've definitely had those interviews where musicians come in and they're their best PR version of themselves. Which okay, fine. If that's how you want to present yourself, that's fine. But I want to talk to the real person. I want to talk
Yeah.
if I ask you, "Hey, you've got a song called Country Kitchen. What's that song about?" And don't give me the PR answer. I want like did you grow up in the country and your mom in the kitchen? Like whatever it was. Uh, as you can tell, I'm not very good at ad-libbing song names, but
Yeah, no, I think that's really cool. But yeah, you've been doing this for so long and have so much experience. So, what do you think your favorite part of hosting live and amplified is, aside from getting to talk to so many guests?
well, it's this one's going to sound a little deranged, but there was an interview that I had. I think it was early on during the pandemic, so it had to be 2020, and it was a solo country musician. He was releasing his this was early on during his solo country career because as I'll tell you here in a minute, he had kind of transitioned from a different musical career path. And I just thought, okay, cool, it's a solo country artist, we'll have a conversation, it'll be fun. He seemed like a chill dude, and about 10-15 minutes before the interview, I was kind of doing my pre-show Insta or social media push, like, "Hey, we're going live in 10 minutes. Make sure you come hang out," all that fun stuff.
Yeah.
And I went on his Instagram page, and I don't know why I hadn't gone on his Instagram page earlier in the day, but I was on his Instagram page, and his Instagram handle was something to the effect of uh 3 doors down. I don't remember 100% what his Instagram handle is, but it was something 3 doors down. And I'm like, that's interesting. He must just be a really big 3 doors down fan. And so I'm just sitting there and I'm going through 5 minutes before the show and I'm looking at his thing and I'm like, wait a minute, this name looks really familiar. And I go through, it was the bass player for 3 doors down. And I'm like, and so to kind of get back to the point of the story was when I think I know what's going on, and then it gets flipped on its head, and I just gotta
Yeah.
go in there completely unprepared, that's my favorite type of interview because then that's when my most curious nature kicks in because I know absolutely nothing at this point, and those are my favorite interviews.
Yeah. No, that makes total sense. That's so funny though. Oh my god. Oh my gosh, that's perfect. But yeah, I think like too, like that's why for my show too, I don't plan ahead of time. Like if we do very specific topic based, maybe I'll have like a few talking points I want to hit. But like people have asked me like, can I have questions ahead of time? Like,
Mhm.
can I have like a layout? Like, no, this is like supposed to be very chill. And I think when you leave room for that, that's like
Yeah.
what you said, the best things come from that because it can go off in many directions.
Yeah.
Like you have no idea what's gonna come, and that's like
Yeah.
100% authentic, and I think that's awesome.
Yeah, and, I mean, nothing against this one I think it was earlier this year, I had an interview with a musician by the name of Townsend. She's, from Arkansas, she's from, like, Pine Bluff, Arkansas, and she's a really cool musician, really cool person to chat with, and I'd love to have her back on, but it was one of those things where she sent me her EPK and, like, her press and, like, her bio and all that stuff, and, like, every so or I'll read through it, but I won't read through it, like, in depth. I'll just try and find, like, key points. Usually, it's like, "Oh, she went to this school, she's from here,"
Yeah.
stuff just like super basic stuff so I
Yeah.
don't come off like an idiot. Um, and I was just sitting there and I don't know, there was something in her bio that just grabbed me by how she got into music. And I started reading this bio and I'm like, oh my, we've got so much to talk about. And I think a lot of this stuff we would have gotten to naturally had I just gone through my normal course of questions and like my normal curiosity just kind of taken over. But I was trying so hard to make sure we hit these different points that the interview kind of comes off choppy and un are not authentic.
Oh, okay.
So
Yeah.
it's just one of those things where I've just like over the last 90 days or so, I've kind of found my happy spot of what do I consider being prepared versus unprepared versus over prepared.
Yeah. No, that's a totally valid point, and I think I've kind of had a similar situation where I've had quite a few people on and some coming up who are pretty established. And when I get emails from these PR agents, like looking like they really want to be on the show, like things have baffled me. And so I got so anxious and felt like over prepared, like I had questions and like I was like, I need to like look good, like I don't want to look bad. But then I'm thinking, if they're reaching out, they obviously listen to an episode and they obviously like how it's super chill and genuine. So why am I taking a different approach just because they're
Yeah.
more mainstream? And
Yeah.
so I've had to try to like not do that as much because those people, especially like if they have that much experience behind them, they're gonna have great stories and great advice. So not having them feel tied down by very specific questions, it's actually a good thing, but I've had to get away from doing the
Yeah.
over research for them.
Yeah. 100%. 100%. So
Yeah, for sure. So, what do you think is your biggest challenge with hosting the show?
Um, actually trying to find balance on the type of musicians because, you know, early on we kind of fell into this uh I don't want to call it a funk, but we kind of fell into this pattern of we just had a lot of solo acoustic musicians. And I mean, we still have a lot of like solo acoustic musicians or country musicians, but, I want Live and Amplified to be a platform for all, for any type of musician, and it just so happens that Americana, solo acoustic songwriter types, just happen to be the most, common types of musicians out there, which there's nothing wrong with that, but I'm really trying to get myself into the habit of seeking out bands of all different types and bringing in more like hip hop because hip hop's where is like the first types of music that I really enjoyed as far as like my um not being influenced through other people by it. It was the type of music that I naturally gravitated to. And growing up through high school and early on in college, I, had a few friends that were in the hip hop scene in South Chicago. So like just getting back to those roots and bringing in more hip hop acts is definitely something that I'm trying to do just to have more equal representation. That's the one thing that I've really been struggling with lately.
Well, I think that's a really great perspective, and I love how the show is so inclusive because many aren't. Many are very specific and have this cookie cutter image of the guests they want, and I think it's really cool how you're so inclusive and actively looking for ways of bringing different musicians on.
Mm.
Are there any kind of musicians or types that you haven't had on yet that is on your list?
Um No, I think we've had pretty much every type, like, as far as, like, a if we're painting it with a broad, stroke here, we've had pretty much every type of musician. I think the only thing that we really haven't had much of is, like, blues musicians.
Oh, okay.
Um, and that obviously, so through 6 years of the podcast and over 500 episodes, it's just kinda like I'm trying to run through my head of what types of musicians we haven't had, but for some reason, like, blue that we haven't had that many blues musicians, if any at all.
Oh, wow.
Like, as if we're talking, like, traditional
Mhm.
blues musicians,
Yeah.
so
Yeah. I can't really think of any blues independent artists off the top of my head. Um,
Yeah,
yeah, no, there's so many pop and country and folk. I think that's the most popular, and especially rock bands. But
yeah.
no, I can't think of any blues ones.
Yeah, it's one of those things where blues is definitely the big one that pops out. We haven't had much in the way of like Hispanic artists, which
Okay.
I'd really love to have on. We we've had one musician that she kind of crossed over more into like pop music, but she could easily be in the Tejano or I don't even know what other like salsa music or something.
Yeah.
She could definitely kind of cross over into that world, but I'd love to bring in more Hispanic artists as well.
That'd be cool. Yeah, I personally love Spanish music. Like, it's weird. Like, when I was in school and I studied Spanish, like, when we'd always listen to the Spanish music, I loved it. And I know a lot of, not a lot, but a handful of artists who are in the pop world, but
Hmm.
they're from that, background. So some of their songs they sing in Spanish or do Spanish verses and collaborate with other Spanish artists. I think that's really cool. That'd be awesome if we can get more on.
Yeah, and it's just kind of like right now I'm looking at like all the different countries we've already had on, especially during the pandemic, moving everything online. It's like we went from, oh, we're only going to do American artists to now I think,
Worldwide.
yeah, we're worldwide. And, just like the amount of Hispanic musicians that we haven't had on, like, I'd love to just bring in more Hispanic musicians, maybe some down in the Caribbean and
Mhm.
stuff like that. Cause, like I spent a lot of time in Florida and there's a lot of like Caribbean music influence down there. And just, yeah, that would be something that I'd really enjoy is bringing in more Hispanic musicians.
That'd be awesome. So, through the time hosting the show, what do you think the biggest lesson you've learned was?
Everybody's a human. That was the big thing that I took away from like the everybody's a human at the end of the day. Everybody has their moments of happiness, sadness, like everybody has their moments. And I really learned that lesson. So back early on during the pandemic, I think this was like June 2020, I had somehow scored an interview with Roger Earl, who is the drummer for Foghat. They wrote the song "Slow Ride" for any of the classic rock fans that happen to be listening. Um, and I had worked my way into that interview through my dad because my dad had flown them to a photo shoot for an album when he was first learning how to fly. And so I kind of worked that into the conversation and got that interview. And as I was preparing for this interview, I was like, "Ma- what is this internationally traveled musician that's been around the world and back again? What are we going to talk about?" And it was one of those things like I've not been that many places in my life. What am I going to ask this guy? And how, and right before we got started, he was like, he told me, he was like, "Look, let's just talk. Like, you don't have to, like, I know you got certain things that you want to hit, but let's just talk." And I'm like, "Okay, I got this." And, I just, we just started talking like two old friends and we hit the one big point that I wanted to talk about. And about an hour in, I was like, "Okay, well, we're gonna start wrapping this up." And he's like, "Why are we wrapping this up? This is fun. Let's keep going." And I'm like, "Oh, okay. I just didn't want to waste your," and I told him like right on the interview, I was like, "I just didn't want to waste your time." And he's like, "Oh no, we're having fun. Like, you got more questions?" And I was like, "Yeah, I got more." And so when we talked for like another half hour,
Oh, wow.
uh, and so it like out of that, like especially after the podcast, he basically told me, he's like, "Look, I'm just another guy. Like we're all in the same position at this point because we're talking June 2020. Like that's
Yeah.
the height of lockdown for everyone." And so yeah, that was the moment that I realized like no matter who I have on, they're just humans. They're just people. You got to talk to them like that.
I love that. I love that so much because It's so cool. I think musicians in general, like, I think we're like a different personality type. Like, we can sit down with somebody that we've never spoken to before and be vulnerable and open and just talk like we're best friends. And it's just so crazy because I've talked to so many incredible people who have opened up about extremely vulnerable things. And I'm just sitting here like, wow, like, they're not just telling me, they're saying it publicly for anybody to listen to. And I think it's so cool how this industry and musicians and the people who support musicians like you, like, being in that space to be open and have conversations and just be on equal ground no matter, like, where you are in your career, if you're a musician or not, and just having those conversations, because I think that's where the magic happens. Everybody's human, everybody has their story, and I think when you give somebody the opportunity to open up about something and just give them the validation, like, yeah, like, what you have to say matters, because I feel like today, with so many people trying to do this and dealing with all the things going on now, I think it's hard to talk about things and feel like what you have to say matters and that you have a voice and all that. And so just giving somebody a space to feel like they're wanted to be listened to and feel like, oh, I can talk about this and people actually care what I'm saying. I think that's absolutely beautiful. And that's one of my favorite things about, hosting this show and listening to yours and all the other incredible shows out there.
Yeah, absolutely. I 100% agree.
So before we wrap up here, what is in store for Live and Amplified for the rest of the year and going into 2023? I cannot believe 2022 is already more than halfway over.
I know, right? That I just had that epiphany this morning when I realized because I was filling out some paperwork and I started putting July and they're like, "No, it's August, dude. What are you doing?" I'm like, "Oh, dang it." Um, no, but so for the rest of 20, so we have some pretty big things in the works, and I'll just kind of be very candid about what we got going on. So this past weekend, I went to Memphis for the first time. I'd never been to Memphis, and we had a musician that we've had on the podcast a handful of times. She's from the UK. This musician by the name of Nia Nichols. She was in Memphis and she invited me to come out. And it's like, hey, it's my last weekend in Memphis. I got a couple of shows lined up with it. And I was like, okay, well, while I'm out there, I've had this idea to relaunch our original video series, but as a live stream on Twitch. Um, and so we went out there, we did that, and it went off swimmingly. Um, and I'm really proud with how it came out. So we're gonna try and do the jam session live series on Twitch. We're gonna try and do that once a month, at least initially. If we can get it more than that, great. If not, once a month is really all I want to do at this point. But so that's the big new project. Um, we're going to continue doing the podcast. We're working on some pretty big things for the podcast as far as guests and whatnot. We've got a couple of bigger names that are coming through Central Texas and Southeast New Mexico that we're going to try and line up. So that'll be fun. It's one of those things where yes, we're 100% behind the independent musician, but every once in a while we like to sprinkle in a bigger name just to try and get feed off of their name value. Like if we bring in, somebody big that has a whole bunch of fans and a couple of them stick around, that's great for everyone involved. At least from my that's my logic behind the thought.
No, for sure. I
Um
agree.
yeah, and so we've got that. We're gonna keep doing that. We've got some music festivals we've been invited to. One of them, unfortunately, I think we're gonna have to back out of just because it is an international festival. They're out in the UK, and because passports are taking a bit longer to get figured out and the funding's just not quite where I wanted it to be. I think we're going to kind of have to back out of that one, which is super unfortunate. But, it's going to go off well. They're going to have a great time. But after that, we've got a festival down in San Antonio that we're going to go to. It's a songwriters festival, which we're really excited about, and a couple other things going on. And then, of course, we talked about it before we jumped on here on November. Yep, on November 17th, we have our pancreatic cancer fundraiser podcast marathon. I'll come up with a better name for it, but right now it's a fundraising marathon in honor of my mother to promote pancreatic cancer research and awareness.
Well, I'm very excited to be part of that. Such a great event. And yeah, it was lovely having you on. So much going on with all the festivals and the guests and all of that. So congrats on 6 years of the show and 6.5 from the beginning. And I'm so excited to see where the show goes next. So before we go, can you share with everyone where they can find you on social and check out the show?
Oh yeah, for sure. So I've tried to make it as easy as possible. We didn't get lucky in the realm of getting the same username handle, but if you go on every social media platform, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, and if you type in live, the letter N amplified, we should pop up every social media platform that's live, the letter N amplified. And that's Twitter, YouTube, uh, Instagram, Facebook, all the fun stuff. But the catch all would be our website, which is liveandamplified.net, and that's got everything from the blog postings that I sometimes write and our podcast, which is up on Spotify, iTunes, and all that stuff. And that's the Live and Amplified Livecast.
Fabulous, Tom. It was absolutely lovely having you on for such a great conversation. Listeners, thank you so much for listening to this episode with Tom Kwiat. And of course, until next time, stay
Stay
right
right
on
on
track.
track.